So, when did you first become aware of Ratatouille, the TikTok musical? Were you on TikTok from the early stages watching it develop, or did you learn about it a little later, once it had picked up steam?
Yeah, I've actually realized that I found out about it because um, we have this sort of like social media guru called Genevieve who works on the show Six that I directed and wrote. And basically, she emailed our company being like, "Have you guys heard this Ratatouille the TikTok musical thing? Like, Six should definitely get involved. Like, the Queen should do like a rat that, like, literally just being like, it's really like in right now. You guys should get ahead of the. She's always ahead of the curve. She knows what's going on. Anyway, that's why I was like, oh, like, what's this thing? And then like a week later, I had an email from my agent being like, so they've asked if you would like to like direct this like concert of it. And then I was like, wait, okay, so what is this? And that's when I then went on my kind of like TikTok spiral of just like watching all of the videos and being like, what is this?
Totally. I mean, what was your first thoughts when you learned you would be directing it? Like what went through your mind in that moment when you got that call, right before you started to dig in and see what it was all about?
I was nervous because I've been working on the same thing for a really long time. So I was like, oh my goodness, scary. And also I like it was like I was a really big fan of the book writers that had been brought on to write the book. So I was like, oh my gosh, I was like really starstruck about working with them. And also just like was a bit like felt a bit like I think just by the nature of it, a bit like, wait, what's going on? Like sort of like struggling to like get my bearings for probably until it was already, it was released. That's sort of how I felt the whole way through, but in a good way.
Definitely. I mean, how did you develop your vision for the show? The way Ratatouille had come together was unlike anything that had come before it. Did you immediately have ideas of how you wanted to approach it, or did that take some time to figure out?
I definitely immediately had like some guiding principles that I knew I wanted to involve, not involve, that I knew I wanted to kind of like work via, which were like, because I think the thing that really excited me about it was that the TikTok creators' aspirations, like everybody who was submitting costume designs and set designs and songs and choreography, it was all so like Broadway with a capital B, like musical theater. Like it wasn't this kind of like cool, like online edgy, like digital show. It was like people were like, I want to see kick lines, I want to see like moving set pieces. And what I was really drawn to was the fact that it was about trying to like see all of those aspirations and be like, okay, in what way can we realize it whilst also respecting its origins and whilst also doing that via an online platform that everyone's to film themselves and like it's nothing like a theatrical process. So yeah, for me, I basically like the guiding principles were that I wanted everything to basically at any time I had a decision to make, I had just decided to go with whatever was the most iconic. So anything, I was like, which is going to be the more iconic version of this thing, great. Which I think is kind of just like what the whole thing was about, was being like, Broadway, here's you, here's like everything that you kind of like, like wish fulfillment. But I also think that for me, it was about really like respecting the creators of the content from TikTok, like really respecting their work and treating it with the same kind of like slight irony and hilarity and kind of like irreverence that they do on TikTok, but never like but only in the sense of like embracing that spirit and that tone, but whilst also actually taking the material like really seriously and being like, this is an amazing thing that you guys have created, and like how can like the Broadway community like give you what you've been wishing for, as opposed to it being like, how can I put my stamp on this thing? It was very like, how can I make it so that like if I was one of the writers of one of the songs, I saw this and was like, oh my gosh, like my Broadway dreams have come true, even though it's a pandemic and it's all like on the internet. So yeah, so I didn't have like, oh, it must all be in like triptych, it must be like this, but I had like a real sense of like what the like overarching principle I wanted to work via was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure, it makes sense. I mean, it was so interesting because it was so of the moment. It couldn't have been made at any other time, but it was also such an ode to Broadway, like you said. I mean, there were, TikTok dance moves in it. It was just a perfect marriage of the thing that we were missing so much while we were away from the theater with the new thing it had become, in its place when it had to. It was so cool.
Thank you. Thanks. That's so great. That's sort of the idea. So I'm glad that, that you thought it worked.
Oh my God, of course it did. Of course, it was so successful. I mean, how did you feel directing the production, virtually as opposed to in person, which you had been doing and doing it so fast?
It was wild. It was so different to anything I've ever done before. I am such a, I'm really not like a film person in terms of like, I haven't ever worked on films before. It's all been very like theatery, so I've all been barely worked on anything. But my like background is very much like working in theatre and directing like in a theatrical way. So I'm so used to being in the room with people and kind of like fostering an atmosphere and a vibe and relationships and really getting in on the text. Whereas this was really like, it was way more like eyes on the macro, like what like mechanisms can I like sort of like prop everything up with so that people can do their amazing jobs of doing their performances, but like then we can slot it all together like a jigsaw. So it was kind of felt, it was sort of more it was more like detail in terms of like specifics about like where to look and when and how to film it and all that kind of stuff. So it basically involved a lot more like pre-work from me in terms of figuring out how it was all going to fit together and like making sort of like artificial decisions about the like how the kind of like chemistry between characters were going to come across and how we were going to like navigate the kind of like the sense that they were interacting with each other. But then it was a case of, in our Zoom rehearsals, I did like one-on-ones with everyone. That was pretty much it. It was about like helping everybody get on board with understanding what the bigger picture was so that they could have the freedom to like do their own thing within that. So it was very much about like getting people to understand the tone, but also getting them to understand like what this absolutely nuts like spreadsheet they've just been sent with like shot lists and whatever, and like trying to contextualize it for them. So it was like, it was a really different process. And yeah, and the speed thing just meant I didn't sleep at all for the whole December.
Yeah, like it was done over 1 month, which is just sort of plays into the fact that it was created entirely on an app too. Everything was untraditional, but it made something incredible from that very short timeline.
Yeah, I think part of that was because I like if something is before, so we were before Christmas and the deadline was after Christmas, and in my head that's like next year. Do you know what I mean? It's like so
Yeah.
far away from Christmas. I think that like the original plan that I came up with was like complicated shot list and everything. I basically hadn't really fully appreciated how ridiculous the timescale was until it was too late to backpedal, and then I just all had to work way harder. So I think I probably take some of the responsibility for making it incredibly stressful, but also rewarding, hopefully. But yeah, for making everyone work insanely hard was just because I sort of stupidly was like, what we're going to do? Everyone's going to shoot 5 different versions of their own scene from different angles, and everyone's like, okay, well, I guess that's what we're editing together now. So yeah, it was pretty wild.
Definitely. And yeah, what was it like working with just such an incredible cast? I mean, cast and crew, of course, like just the entire team, really. What was it like working with everybody? It was so crazy.
Oh, it was amazing. I actually, although I worked so hard, I like really get nostalgic for it. And I was actually having a really fun time despite being quite, being under like being very stressed as well. Like just the cast are just absolute like literal legends, like not even like, oh, they're legend, like they're like actual like bona fide legends. And it was just amazing to get to talk to them and meet them and talk with them about their characters and just see the amazing work that they could do. And similarly with the team, yeah, like as I said, I'm not sure if I said already, but I was such a big fan of the book writers Michael and Patrick before we started working together, because I'd seen their online show Circle Jerk, which just got nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, which is amazing. Before, and like yeah, and like just like Eleanor, the choreographer, was just so cool, and we got on so well, and like David, the video editor, was so amazing. It was a real privilege to work with them, and I really felt like an absolute imposter. I was like, everyone here is so good. I'm just like sitting in my house.
Oh my gosh,
like,
that's wild. You're as big as they come. That's crazy.
I really felt like a small child, like doing like I literally felt like when I was like dressed up in my like mom's clothes, being like, yes, stand over there, and like no one's realized I'm a child. Anyway.
I mean, that's great. What are your thoughts on, just how big of an impact this whole thing has had? It raised, I believe it was $2 million for the Actors Fund. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was, I mean, it feels like good karma, start off the year by raising loads of money. And I like to take full credit for that myself personally, obviously. Yeah, it just is amazing to think about how much money's been raised, and particularly at a time when the Actors Fund is so vital for people in this industry. So that was just like, yeah, like, you know, the reason everyone was working so hard, the reason everyone, you know, all these amazing people were there, was because it felt really important to do that. And yeah, I think also the other thing is, in terms of like theatre making, I think what was really interesting is like the thing that drew me to the project was the idea of making this sort of like quite like out there form of trying to make something really theatrical via a virtual space. But what I realized in working on it was that it was a really interesting experiment in like democratizing the theatrical process and democratizing like who gets their voice heard. And I think I'm hoping that the legacy of Ratatouille will be that, you know, it's not just like the same old faces, same old writers getting called up because they've done it before. Like it proves that people who that like great work can come from anywhere, you know, kind of like the message of Ratatouille, right? Anyone can cook. Similarly, it feels like the message of TikTok as an app is like anyone can create, and it really felt like this was kind of like the realization of that, and hopefully a step towards, yeah, like breaking down the barriers to entry for the theatre industry, particularly the Broadway sphere. Because obviously it's, you know, it's in many ways very elite. So yeah, I'm hopeful that it's making, you know, it'll hopefully have a legacy of making steps to making theatre more accessible, theatre making more accessible.
Absolutely. It definitely proved that it can be more accessible. You just need to sort of broaden the meaning of what theater can be.
Totally.
You know, what is it? You're a millennial, right?
I guess so. I think I'm like on the exact, but yes.
On the cusp?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what is it? The whole thing was started by, you know, a group of young people, by millennials and Gen Z creators. What did it feel like for you specifically, you know, to watch this come to fruition by all these young people specifically?
Well, I think I'm probably an interesting case of one of the few people who that's their entire career, is like, so with Six, that another show, like that was all, you know, me and my pals at university making a show, and like obviously, you know, people who are involved are older as well, but like I've been very fortunate to spend a lot of my time working with people of around my age, or if, you know, millennials and Gen Z people, you know, that tend to be who we end up having in the cast, but also, you know, our core creative team was our millennials and Gen Z. So it felt sort of second nature in that sense to me. Also because, again, I feel like my entire vibe is that like I feel like a small child in the industry of really impressive people. So actually, I really like, you know, it wasn't unusual for me, but I think that I'm very specific in that. And I think for a lot of people, it must have been a real change from always having, you know, everyone being 20 years older than them in their roles, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it makes sense. And it's such an amazing legacy for young people to have left, and also a way for many people's careers to jumpstart from this. So it was a pretty special thing. Those are all my questions for you.
Fab.
I appreciate your time. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much.